Sometimes what hurts most is not what actually happens, but what we expect to receive. That child you gave your best years to, the sleepless nights, the care and love, today seems not to see you, not to hear you, not to value you. And from there comes the question that keeps you awake. What did I do wrong? I want you to know something from the start. It's not always your fault. There are deep psychological and human dynamics that explain why an adult child distances themselves or stops showing gratitude. Understanding them is the first step in turning pain into wisdom. My name is Gabriel, and I have studied and practiced Stoicism as a philosophy of life for many, many years. I have accompanied hundreds of people in different parts of the world, and I have seen how family wounds, when left unexplained, become invisible chains that imprison the soul. But I have also seen how, with reflection, with courage, and with a new perspective, that same pain can become a doorway to inner peace, dignity, and the serenity you long for. Today, I invite you to walk with me through 13 psychological and philosophical keys that not only explain why a child may stop valuing their parents, but also show you how to regain your center, your strength, and your purpose. This is not about resignation. It is about transformation. Not about carrying guilt that doesn't belong to you, but about clearly seeing what is in your hands and releasing what is not. Let's begin. Number 1. Your child doesn't owe you gratitude. There's something deeply uncomfortable, but once you take it in, it sets you free. Your child doesn't owe you gratitude. They don't owe it because the love you gave, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, and the things you gave up were never an investment expecting returns, but acts of giving. The problem is that our culture taught us to think the other way around. I gave so much. I deserve so much. And when an adult child doesn't respond with the gratitude we expect, the blow hurts, as if a piece of our dignity had been torn away. But what would happen if you started to see that story differently? The Stoics understood this clearly. Epictetus said that what gives value to our actions is not another person's reaction, but the intention we put into them. If you cared, if you fed, if you educated, you did it because it was the right thing to do, not because your child signed some invisible lifelong contract. The trap is turning love into debt. And debt, by its very nature, always breeds resentment. Let me give you an image. Imagine you're a gardener who waters their plants every day. You don't do it because you expect the flower to say thank you each morning. You do it because it's your task, your purpose, your choice. The plant will grow however it can. Some will bear sweet fruit, others thorns, others will wither without explanation. But none of them owes you anything. What is yours is the satisfaction of seeing what grew, not something mortgaged to recognition. One afternoon in autumn, while reading Seneca, I came across a phrase that left a mark on me. The one who gives expecting something in return has already made a deal. The one who gives without expecting has found virtue. That's when I understood that many times we suffer because we confuse virtues with unpaid bills. Maybe what weighs you down the most today is not your child's distance, but that feeling of, they owed me and they never paid. Now, this doesn't mean denying that it hurts. Of course it hurts. Denying pain only buries it deeper, but you can start to look at it differently. If the love you gave turned into expectation, then that pain doesn't come only from your child, but also from a broken illusion. And once you understand that, you regain power, because expectations are something you can change. Here's a simple exercise. Take a blank sheet of paper and write 3 sentences starting with, I did it because, for example, I did it because it was my duty. I did it because I loved them. I did it because I wanted to live true to my values. This simple act brings you back to the certainty that your actions were yours, and their value isn't measured in applause. And what about the emptiness that remains? Here, philosophy offers something radical. Peace comes when you stop waiting for what is not in your hands. That doesn't mean coldness. It means dignity. It means letting go of the chains of imagined debt so you can walk freely again, head held high. Your child may or may not thank you someday, but your serenity cannot depend on that. Always remember, true emotional freedom doesn't lie in what you receive, but in what you choose to give without strings attached. That's the first step for pain to stop being a prison and start becoming wisdom. Number 2. Individuation, not rejection. One of the biggest misunderstandings between parents and adult children is confusing individuation with rejection. When a child starts to create distance, make different choices, or even question what they once accepted, we often feel they're pushing us away, that they don't love us anymore or no longer value us. But what's really happening much of the time is a natural and necessary process. Individuation, that psychological movement where a person builds an identity separate from their family of origin. Carl Jung described it as an essential journey. To truly become oneself, one must walk the path of differentiation, and that often means letting go of the fusion with mother or father. A child who begins to claim their own territory isn't necessarily saying, "I reject you," but "I want to be me." And while for a parent that separation may feel like a painful loss, in reality, it's a sign of growth. Think of a young eagle who, after weeks in the nest, dares to throw itself into the air currents. Does it hate the mother who fed it? Of course not. What it seeks is to test its wings, to find its own flight. The problem comes when the parent, hurt in their expectations, interprets that flight as betrayal. That's when a cycle of reproach, silence, and resentment begins. A cycle that has little to do with a lack of love and everything to do with the difficulty of accepting another's independence. I remember working with a woman, let's call her Claire, who cried bitterly because her son, after getting married, no longer visited her every week. To her, it felt like abandonment. But as we talked, what we discovered was that he was simply trying to build his own life, balancing his time between work, his partner, and new projects. There was no rejection, just readjustment. Claire's pain didn't come from her son not loving her, but from interpreting his distance as lack of love. Here's a small mental exercise. When you notice your child pulling away or setting boundaries, instead of asking yourself, "What did I do wrong?" try asking, "What are they trying to build for themselves?" That question completely changes the angle from which you see the situation. It's no longer you against them, but recognizing that every person, even your child, needs their own space to grow. Of course, there will be cases where the distance is harder, with hurtful words or indifference. But even then, distinguishing between rejection and individuation helps you avoid carrying unnecessary guilt. It's not the same when a child steps back because they need to breathe as when they cut ties because of wounds. And being able to tell the difference is already half the battle for peace. In the end, what sets you free is understanding that true love doesn't demand eternal fusion. It accepts distance as part of the natural cycle. Your role isn't to hold on, but to accompany from a different place, wiser, calmer. Don't mistake flight for contempt. Sometimes the clearest proof that your child grew thanks to you is that they now dare to fly without you. Number 3, the myth of sacrifice that demands repayment. There's an idea that quietly ruins us. The belief that everything we did for our children must come back multiplied in gratitude, care, or presence. It's the myth of sacrifice as debt. And it's dangerous because without realizing it, it turns you into a collector of invisible bills. Every time your child doesn't call, doesn't visit, or doesn't respond the way you expect, that bill lights up inside you, and it hurts as if you'd been cheated. Our culture has repeated this script. A mother gives her life, children must always honor her. Of course, respect is valuable, but the problem begins when sacrifice turns into emotional blackmail. And let me be honest, nothing destroys a bond more than the sense that every gesture comes with the silent phrase, "You owe me." A child can feel it, even if you never say it out loud, and then comes the discomfort, the urge to pull away, the guilt mixed with anger. Some time ago, I wrote a reflection in a notebook after reading Marcus Aurelius. He said that goodness is its own reward, that one shouldn't expect applause for doing the right thing. That day, I understood that much of the pain in parent-child relationships doesn't come from what we did, but from what we expected to collect afterward. We turn acts of love into pending invoices, and that inevitably leads to disappointment. Picture a scale for a moment. On one side are all your sacrifices, Sleepless nights, personal renunciations, years of hard work. On the other side, you expect your child to place gratitude, presence, recognition. If they don't, the scale feels unfair, heavy on your side. But now change the image. Think of a fountain. It gives and gives, without asking who drank or how many times they said thank you. Giving as a fountain is freedom. Giving as a scale is debt. From which place do you want to live? And I know someone may be thinking, but then what do I do with what I feel? It's not about silencing yourself or denying the pain. It's about transforming the narrative. Instead of repeating, they owe me, you can start saying, I did it because it was my choice. That change may look small in words, but it's huge in freedom. It's not resignation. It's reclaiming your dignity because you're no longer tied to someone else's response. To make this more practical, let me suggest some pocket phrases you can use in tense moments. Instead of saying, after all I did for you, this is how you repay me, try, I raised you with love, and now I trust your decisions. Instead of, you don't value me, say, I know my worth, even if you don't see it right now. These are phrases that free you, that don't corner the other person, and that remind you of your own strength. And here, in the middle of this conversation, I want to invite you to something simple but meaningful. If you feel these words are striking a chord in you, subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments which country you're listening from, because I love discovering how this community reaches so many corners of the world. Hit like on this video so it can reach more people who, like you, might need this message today. True love is not sacrifice turned into currency. It's conscious giving, free of chains. Once you understand this, you're no longer a victim of imaginary debt. You're a fountain, not a scale. And from there, believe me, life feels so much lighter. Number 4, wounds and mistakes without self-punishment. Here I want to step into delicate territory, accepting that as parents, we also make mistakes. There is no mother or father who raised a child without getting things wrong. But be careful. Acknowledging mistakes doesn't mean carrying an eternal backpack of guilt. Toxic guilt is like a voice that repeats endlessly, it was all your fault. And that inner whip leaves you exhausted, without strength or clarity. Calm responsibility is something else. It's looking at what you did, recognizing what you might have done differently, and if there's still room, trying to make amends. And if there isn't, learning to let go. The first step is accepting that a child may hold on to wounds, some real and others filtered through their own perception. Maybe they remember shouts you've already forgotten, decisions that to you seem necessary, but to them felt like injustices. That doesn't make you a monster, it makes you human. No one raises a child with a flawless manual. What hurts is staying trapped in the question, what would have happened if? Because that question has no end. I remember reading Seneca say that those who stay anchored to what cannot be changed become slaves of the past. That phrase made me close the book and sit in silence for a long time. Because it's true, we can learn from mistakes, but we can never redo the scene. And if you insist on punishing yourself for what can't be repaired, you don't just suffer, you block any chance of healing the bond with your child. Now, let's talk about asking for forgiveness. Asking for forgiveness doesn't mean kneeling or begging. It means looking the other person in the eye and saying, I know I hurt you at times and I'm sorry. Period. It's not about adding a sermon of justifications, nor about expecting your child to immediately respond, thank you, Mom, now let's start over. Sometimes you'll be met with silence, other times even rejection. And here's the hardest part. Accepting that the forgiveness you offer does not guarantee reconciliation. But even so, asking for it frees you because it clears your side of the story. There's a simple formula I often recommend, and I want to share it with you now. Acknowledge, repair, respect, release. Acknowledge what you did or what might have hurt. Repair, if possible, with a concrete action. Respect the other person's decision, even if they don't want to talk. And release, not as abandonment, but as acceptance that you've done what was in your hands. That release is not defeat, it's maturity. If communication is closed, you can write a letter you'll never send. Put into it everything you hold, what you wish you could say, even what you never dared to. When you read it aloud and then keep it or burn it, it becomes a cleansing ritual. You don't need your child's validation to begin letting go. Sometimes true healing begins in your own private space. I want you to engrave this in your heart. Making mistakes does not take away your worth as a mother or father. Clinging to eternal guilt does. Mistakes can be teachers, but only if you face them with honesty and without lashes. Your dignity isn't measured by your errors, but by your ability to own them without losing yourself. And that is an act of greatness no child can erase, even if they never acknowledge it. Number 5, boundaries that don't sound like punishment. This point is crucial because many times we confuse setting boundaries with punishing, and they're not the same. A healthy boundary is not revenge, not a disguised threat, not a "I'll shut the door until you respect me." A healthy boundary is an act of self-love, a way to protect your peace without needing to hurt the other person. And believe me, when you learn to do it, you feel an immense relief because you're no longer trapped in the dynamic of begging for affection. The first thing to understand is that a boundary doesn't need endless explanations. Saying no doesn't require a 15-paragraph manual. Sometimes a firm, calm phrase is enough. "I can't today. Don't speak to me in that tone. I'll get back to you tomorrow." The common mistake is dressing the boundary up with excuses, as if you needed to justify your right to take care of yourself. But the more you dress it up, the weaker it sounds. Boundaries aren't shouted, they're upheld. Let me give you a clear example. Imagine your child comes to your home and starts speaking to you aggressively. You have two choices. The first, to react from the wound and hit back, which ends in yelling and resentment. The second, to raise your invisible fence and calmly say, "If you speak to me like this, the conversation ends here." Then you walk away to your room or the kitchen. There's no punishment, just a natural consequence. Respect is the entry ticket for dialogue. I once read a metaphor I loved: the bridge keeper. Your life is like a bridge that connects with others. You decide who crosses and under what conditions. If someone arrives with respect, the keeper lifts the gate. If someone arrives with aggression, the keeper lowers it. That's how boundaries work. You don't expel anyone from your world, you simply define the terms under which they can come in. Now, you might be thinking, but what if I end up alone if I set boundaries? That's the most common trap. Fear of loneliness makes many people tolerate disrespect they would never allow in any other relationship. But here comes the hard and liberating truth. Anyone who stays by your side only because you don't set boundaries was never really with you. True bonds can handle healthy borders. False ones break at the first no. I want to suggest a practical exercise. Write down 3 boundaries you want to set on a card. 1 emotional, for example, "I won't accept insults." 1 practical, "Visits only with prior notice." And 1 digital, "I'll answer messages when I feel calm." Keep that card with you. When in doubt, look at it. It's not a weapon. It's a reminder of your right to protect your peace. Boundaries aren't walls that lock you in. They're doors you choose when to open. They don't sound like punishment because they're not meant to hurt. They sound like dignity because they remind you that your worth doesn't depend on your child's approval. And when you manage to set them calmly, you discover that respect begins within you and expands outward like a powerful echo. Number 6. From judgment to curiosity. Speaking without making things worse. One of the most common mistakes when we feel a child doesn't value us is reacting with judgment. We say things like, "You're ungrateful," "After everything I did for you," or "I don't matter to you anymore." And even though the pain behind those words is real, what they trigger in the other person is resistance and anger. Judgment is received as an attack, and attack sparks defense. It's a cycle that always ends in more distance. The alternative is to turn judgment into curiosity. It's not about swallowing what you feel, but about expressing it in a way that opens the door instead of closing it. Instead of saying, "You don't value me," you might ask, "What do you need from me right now?" Instead of blurting out, "You don't care about your mother anymore," you could say, "I'd like to understand how you're experiencing this stage of your life." It's a subtle change in words, but a deep shift in effect. The key is truly listening, without preparing your reply while the other is speaking. Sometimes we crave recognition so much that while our child is explaining their side, we're already crafting our counter-argument. But if what you want is to rebuild a bridge, you first need to put down the hammer of judgment and sit at the shore of curiosity. Let me give you a simple 4-step structure you can practice in a difficult conversation. First, breathe and notice your own emotion before speaking. Second, shape your message as an open-ended question, not an accusation. Third, listen actively, without interrupting. Take notes if it helps. And fourth, validate what the other person feels, even if you don't agree. Validation isn't about giving them reason, it's about recognizing that their emotion exists. Here's an example. A mother told me her daughter often answered her coldly. Instead of saying, "You're so rude," she tried this. "I feel distance in your voice. Does it have to do with me, or is it something else?" Her daughter, caught off guard, ended up admitting she was stressed about work, not her. What used to end in fights turned into relief. The simple shift from judgment to curiosity prevented an unnecessary conflict. There's also a very useful practice before starting tough conversations, the 30-second pause. It's as simple as breathing slowly and deeply, eyes closed, before responding. This small ritual calms the mind and keeps your words from coming out laced with reproach. Try it the next time your child says something that hurts you. You'll notice how it changes the tone of the exchange. Imagine each of your words as a flashlight. You can aim it at the shadows of reproach, or you can shine it on the blind spots you haven't yet discovered about the other. When you choose the second option, you become an explorer instead of a judge. And in that space, there's always a greater chance for reconnection. Remember, speaking without making things worse doesn't mean silencing your feelings. It means expressing them in a way that doesn't close doors. Shifting judgment to curiosity won't guarantee your child reacts as you hope, but it will guarantee something even more valuable, that you keep your dignity, your calm, and your clarity in the middle of the storm. Number 7. Family triangles, ex-partners, and invisible alliances. Many times it's not just between you and your child. Sometimes there's a third person, a partner, an ex, a sibling, even a grandparent, who becomes the shadow that alters the relationship. What once seemed like a direct bond now gets tangled into an invisible triangle where tensions multiply and space disappears. And if you don't notice this pattern, you can spend years blaming yourself without realizing there are other voices shaping your child's silence. The concept of triangles in family psychology explains that when two people are in tension, they often involve a third to balance, justify, or unload that tension. It could be that your child feels caught between what their partner says and what they feel for you, or that an ex-spouse keeps fueling old resentments, or that a sibling questions your authority to manipulate closeness. The key here is to understand that your child's distance isn't always born directly from you. Sometimes it's external strings pulling on them. Let me paint it with a metaphor. Imagine a loom. Your relationship with your child is a taut thread stretched between you. But when a third person enters with their opinions, expectations, or resentments, another thread crosses in and warps the fabric. If you don't see it, you keep pulling on the same thread until it breaks. But if you do, you can change your strength and stop playing a game that isn't yours. I remember a story shared by an older woman. Her son had suddenly distanced himself after starting a new relationship. She kept trying to talk, but he was always busy. Later, she discovered that her daughter-in-law felt constantly judged and was pushing to limit contact. Instead of confronting her directly, the mother changed strategy. She decided to send short, judgment-free messages, showing only genuine interest. Over time, her son began responding more naturally. It wasn't magic. It was the choice not to feed the triangle. Here's something vital. Never use phrases that force your child to choose sides, like, "It's either me or her," "You were mine before, and now you're theirs." That kind of language doesn't just fail. It wounds and drives them further away. What you can do is stay firm in your position without attacking the third person. Say, for example, "I respect you, and I'm here if you want to talk." With that, you break the triangle's game and hand the responsibility back to your child. If you sense that someone is fueling the fire of distance, remember this key. The only voice you can truly care for is your own. You can't silence what others say, but you can choose how you respond. And when your response doesn't feed the war, little by little the triangle loses its force. Wisdom lies in realizing that not every battle is won by fighting. Some are won by dropping the rope and refusing to repeat the same pattern. Because when you choose not to enter invisible alliances, sooner or later your child will have to see you without intermediaries. And that day, the bond will be cleaner and more honest than ever. Number 8. Expectations and projections. Letting go of the ideal child. This point is uncomfortable but necessary. Many times, what hurts isn't only what our child does or doesn't do, but the contrast with the image of the ideal child we've spent years building in our minds. That perfect, grateful, ever-present figure simply doesn't exist outside of imagination. And the more tightly you cling to that projection, the more it hurts every time reality refuses to fit the mold. Psychology shows us that we often project our unfinished stories onto our children, what we didn't achieve, what we lacked, what we wish we had received. Without realizing it, we expect them to give us back what life denied us. But children weren't born to complete their parents. They were born to write their own script. And if you don't let go of that expectation, you'll always see them with the eyes of a judge, never of a witness. Here's an honest exercise I invite you to try. Take a sheet of paper and draw 3 columns. In the first, write what you expected from your child. To visit me every week, to always seek my advice, to value every sacrifice. In the second, write what you actually observe today. And in the third, what you choose to accept and release. This isn't an exercise in resignation. It's one of clarity. Because when you put it down in writing, you'll see how much of your pain comes from expectations, not facts. Think of the metaphor of the sculptor. Some parents, instead of accompanying, try to chisel their children until they fit the ideal figure they imagined. But the stone resists, cracks, breaks. The wise sculptor, on the other hand, discovers the form already inside and lets it emerge. They don't impose, they accompany. That's the line between conditional love and true love. Years ago, I heard an old man in a spiritual retreat say something I've never forgotten. My son isn't the son I wanted, but he is the person he was meant to be, and my task is to learn to love him as he is. That phrase, so simple, struck me as one of the purest forms of practical wisdom. Because acceptance doesn't mean resignation. It means no longer fighting against what you can't change. If you cling to the ideal child, you'll always be at war with reality. And that war wears you down, steals your peace, and breeds resentment. When you let go, something shifts inside you. You discover you don't need a perfect child to be a worthy mother or father. All you need is to honor your own life with its light and shadows and allow your child to live theirs. The day you release the imagined child, you'll be able to look at the real one with new eyes. And even if it hurts, that sincere gaze is the first step toward building a different bond, freer and more human. Because in the end, what heals the most isn't that the other changes, but that you stop measuring them against the ruler of your expectations. Number 9. Guilt, no. Awareness, yes. Here we reach a distinction that can save you from much suffering, the difference between guilt and awareness. Guilt is like an invisible whip that follows you day and night, reminding you of every mistake and whispering that you weren't enough. Awareness, on the other hand, is like a lighthouse. It shines on your actions, lets you see where you went wrong, and shows where to correct your course, without destroying you along the way. Toxic guilt traps you in phrases like, "It's too late to change," or "My child pulled away because I'm a bad mother or father." And the more you repeat that, the deeper you sink into helplessness. Awareness, by contrast, allows you to say, "Yes, I made mistakes. Yes, there are things I would do differently, but today I can decide how to live and what to sow in the time I have left." One opens wounds, the other shows the path. In my own search, I came across a biblical passage that struck me deeply. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Romans chapter 12, verse 18. It impressed me because it places responsibility in a very clear place, in what depends on you. It doesn't say you must force peace at all costs, nor that you should carry what is outside your hands. It says, as far as it depends on you. That's the key. Do your part. Let go of the rest. A practical exercise I often recommend is transforming self-talk. When you notice guilt appearing with phrases like, I failed as a mother, replace it with, I'm aware of what happened and I'm learning to do things differently. Writing these phrases in a notebook every night can be a powerful ritual for replacing the whip with the lighthouse. Let me share a personal experience. For years, I carried the feeling of having been unfair in an important relationship in my life. Guilt chased me until one day I stopped and asked myself, what can I do now, from this present? That question led me to take small actions, to ask for forgiveness where I could, and to accept silence where there was no response. From then on, I understood that awareness moved me to act with dignity, while guilt only chained me. It's not about deceiving yourself or denying what you did, but about choosing how you look at it. With guilt, everything is painted with defeat. With awareness, even mistakes become teachers. And if you think about it, the Stoics repeated this same lesson. You cannot change the past, but you can change the way you use it. So next time the memory of a past wound weighs on you, ask yourself, am I using this as a whip or as a lighthouse? The answer will define not only your peace, but also the way you stand again before your child and before your own life. Number 10. When there are narcissistic traits or abuse. Up to now, we've spoken about natural processes, expectations, and wounds that can be healed with reflection and boundaries. But there's something we cannot cover with gentle philosophy. When narcissistic traits or abusive behaviors appear in the relationship, what's at stake is no longer just emotional peace, but your dignity and safety. And here's a hard truth. Not every child acts out of love, and not every distance is simply individuation. Sometimes there is manipulation, contempt, or even mistreatment. Narcissism shows up in clear signs. Systematic indifference to your needs, mocking your feelings, constant demands without reciprocity, making you feel guilty for every boundary you set. If every attempt to talk ends with you being the bad one, the dramatic one, or the one to blame for everything, you're not just dealing with a generational difference, you're facing a harmful pattern. I want to be emphatic here. Recognizing abuse is not betraying your child, it's protecting yourself. Love does not require you to tolerate humiliation, and this includes repeated insults, financial control, emotional threats, if you don't do this, I'm gone, or the infamous gaslighting, when they try to convince you that you're exaggerating or losing your mind. These are red flags, and if ignored, they slowly erode your self-esteem. I remember one afternoon coming across a biblical verse that gave me strength in a moment of doubt. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, of love, and of sound judgment. 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7. I read it at a time when setting a firm boundary felt overwhelming, and it was like a spark. I understood that love and power are not opposites, and that sound judgment also means knowing when to say enough. So what can you do if you recognize these patterns in your relationship with your child? First, don't blame yourself. Manipulation confuses even the clearest minds. Second, set firm, non-negotiable boundaries. For example, I will not allow insults in this house, or if you raise your voice, the conversation ends. Third, document incidents. Writing down what happens helps you stop doubting your own perception. And fourth, seek support from a therapist, a group, or a trusted friend. No one deserves to face abuse alone. Here's a practical tool you can begin today. Whenever you feel the conversation slipping into chaos, plant your feet firmly on the ground, take a deep breath, and silently remind yourself, I have the right to be at peace. That simple physical act brings you back to the present and strengthens your inner power against manipulation. The hardest thing to accept is that sometimes distance is the best defense, not as punishment, but as self-protection. And while society often repeats, a child is a child, and you must endure everything, the truth is that your dignity comes before any bond. No one, Not even a child has the right to break it. Self-love is also shown by being able to say, "This is as far as it goes." Because when you protect your dignity, not only do you free yourself, but you also send a clear message to the world. My life is not a place for abuse. Number 11. Mourning the ideal child and rituals of closure. This is one of the hardest chapters, because it means accepting that your relationship with your child may never be what you imagined. Here, we're not talking about communication strategies or boundaries, but about a real mourning, the mourning of the ideal child. That perfect human being who lived in your mind, grateful, present, affectionate, always ready to care for you, exists only in your heart. And much of the pain you feel today is the loss of that illusion. Grief doesn't always come with visible tears. Sometimes it hides in long silences, in sleepless nights, in that bitter feeling of, "This isn't what I dreamed for my old age." But just as we mourn those who pass away, we also need to mourn the expectations that were never fulfilled. Denying that grief means carrying an invisible weight that slowly crushes you. Acknowledging it is the first step towards setting yourself free. I remember hearing a passage from Ecclesiastes during a spiritual retreat that struck me deeply. "There is a time for everything," chapter 3, verse 1. And I thought, there's also a time to let go of the image of the ideal child and begin to look calmly at the real child, with their limitations, their wounds, and their own battles. It's not resignation, it's an act of respect for yourself. Simple rituals can help here because the heart needs symbols to release. You might write a letter to that ideal child you imagined, thank them for what they represented in your life, and then keep it in a box or burn it in a private act of closure. Or you might choose an object, a stone, a dried flower, a piece of clothing, and give it the meaning of farewell, placing it in a special spot as a symbol that you've let go. These small gestures speak a language that words alone cannot. Once, I accompanied a woman who decided to plant a tree in her yard as part of this process. Each time she watered it, she remembered she hadn't buried her son, but the image that was hurting her. She told me the tree was her reminder that new forms of life can grow out of loss. And over time, when she looked at it, she no longer cried with bitterness, but with a strange and genuine peace. Don't be afraid to ask for help in this grieving process. Sharing it with someone you trust, with a spiritual guide, or even with a support group can give you the strength you need. You don't have to carry this cross alone. Grief becomes lighter when shared, and sometimes hearing that others have gone through the same thing is an unexpected balm. Accepting that the ideal child never existed doesn't mean giving up on love for your real child. It means stopping the fight against ghosts. And when you no longer battle the impossible, you regain strength to live what's possible. Grief is hard, yes, but it's also a doorway to the freedom of loving in a more conscious, real way, less tied to frustration. The day you complete this mourning, you'll notice something profound. The emptiness will no longer be a hole swallowing you, but an open space to breathe and begin again. Number 12. Careful reunions without losing yourself. Talking about reunions doesn't mean believing everything will go back to how it was, or that a hug is enough to erase years of distance. A careful reunion is one that begins from serenity, not desperation, from the desire to build a bridge, not from fear of being alone. The difference is huge, because when you approach from a place of need, your child feels it as pressure. But when you do it from calm, they sense it as a free invitation. One of the simplest tools is writing a short, specific message. No long speeches or reproaches disguised as affection. Something like, "I baked a cake this weekend. Would you like to come for coffee on Sunday?" It's concrete, kind, without drama. It doesn't say, "You've abandoned me," or "After everything I did for you," because those phrases close doors instead of opening them. The careful path is taking a small step without loading it with giant expectations. The Bible tells a powerful story in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 15, verses 11 to 32, the prodigal son. We often hear it from the perspective of the father waiting with open arms. But if you think about it, the message isn't about a perfect reunion, but about how, when it happens, there is dignity in welcoming without demanding explanations. and also dignity in setting clear conditions afterward. That parable reminds us that a return is never identical to the past. It always means a new beginning, with new rules. It's also important to prepare yourself for rejection. You may send an invitation and get no reply, or your child may accept and later cancel. Prudence here means not letting the wound take over again. The key is to remember that your worth doesn't depend on that coffee or that phone call. You are whole with or without your child's response. The reunion is a gift, not a vital necessity. Picture yourself as a lighthouse on the coast. The lighthouse doesn't chase ships or force them to dock. It simply shines, steady, visible, always in the same place. The ship may approach or not, but it knows the lighthouse is there. That's your role. Be a lighthouse. Be present, without begging, without disappearing, and without dimming your own light while you wait. A practical strategy to protect your peace is gradual approach. First a message, then a brief invitation, then a short meeting. Don't try to jump from nothing to weekly family meals. Each step is proof that you can open up without losing yourself. And if at any point you feel the effort is draining you more than it gives, take a pause. It's not about insisting at all costs, but about protecting your dignity as well. Remember, a careful reunion doesn't mean giving up or waiting for miracles. It means approaching with clarity, patience, and love, but always from your center. Because true success isn't that your child comes back to you as before, but that you're able to open the door without losing your peace in the process. Number 13. Your life is not exhausted in the role of father or mother. This final point is perhaps the most liberating of all. Your life is not limited to being a parent. Yes, that role has shaped entire decades, giving you joys, worries, and meaning, but it cannot be the sole pillar of your existence. If you place all your worth on how your child responds, whether they call, visit, or thank you, you condemn yourself to depend on something you cannot control. And that is not love, it's prison. The Stoics often repeated that our true task is to care for what lies within our control. Marcus Aurelius put it simply, the power to live well is in each person's soul, and your soul doesn't shrink because your child is near or far. In fact, this stage of life may be the clearest invitation to rediscover yourself beyond motherhood or fatherhood. Think of all the things you postponed while raising your child. Hobbies, friendships, travel, even the silence you once longed for. This may be the moment to reclaim what you put on hold. Maybe learning something new. Maybe dedicating yourself to volunteer work. Maybe simply giving yourself unhurried mornings with no demands. Your worth isn't measured by how often your child writes to you, but by the full life you build today. I remember a woman who, after years of pain because her son rarely visited, one day decided to enroll in painting classes. She told me that at first it was just a distraction, but over time she discovered that each brushstroke was an act of freedom. Her son remained distant, but she no longer lived waiting for the call. She lived waiting for the next class, the next canvas. That small, practical decision transformed her more than 1,000 reproaches ever could. I want to leave you with a simple practice I call the 3 anchors. Each day, take a moment to strengthen your body, even with a short walk, your mind, through reading, writing, or reflection, and your social connection, a call to a friend, a meeting with someone who values you. 3 anchors to remind you that you are not only a parent, you are a complete person with a life of your own. Picture your existence as a workshop. For years, you worked almost exclusively on one piece, your child. But the workshop is still full of tools, materials, and projects waiting for your hands. Don't close the workshop, because one piece has stepped away. Create again, experiment again, enjoy your own process. In the end, when you understand that your life is not exhausted in the role of father or mother, your relationship with your child also changes. You no longer approach them from scarcity, but from abundance. You no longer demand, you offer. And that shift is powerful, because it restores your dignity and reminds you of something essential. Your peace, your purpose, and your fulfillment do not depend on anyone else. That is the true Stoic victory. We've walked together through 13 keys that not only explain why a child may seem distant or ungrateful, but also remind us of something essential. Not everything is in your hands, and not everything that hurts is your fault. Along this journey, we've seen how expectations, invisible triangles, boundaries, guilt, and even the myth of sacrifice can confuse you and make you feel less than you are. But we also discovered that there are ways to transform that pain into clarity, into dignity, and into a serenity no one can take from you. And today I want to thank you from the heart for making it this far. That says so much about you, about your courage to look inside your story, your openness to learn, and above all, your strength to not give up. My name is Gabriel, and this channel, the Stoic Garden, exists for exactly this, to remind you that even in the midst of chaos, loneliness, or family disappointments, you can reclaim your peace, your self-love, and your purpose. Here we are building a community of seekers of wisdom, supporting each other along this path. Now, I want to invite you to something special. Tell me in the comments which country you're listening from. I'd love to know from which corner of the world you're part of this wonderful community. And also, write with me this phrase that will be our seal for today. I live with wisdom. Leave it there, not just as a comment, but as a commitment to yourself, as a declaration of strength and dignity. If this message resonated with you, share it with someone who needs it. A sister, a friend, a loved one who might be going through the same thing. You never know when a single word can become the encouragement someone has been waiting for. Thank you for being here with me. Thank you for your time, your trust, and your openness. And remember, now on screen, you'll see 2 videos that will surely interest you. Pick one and keep learning how to bring this wisdom into your life in a practical and simple way. I'll be waiting for you there to continue this journey of reflection, strength, and serenity.